So our big question that you're answering, Roxanne, is what was the pandemic practice that you engaged in with your teaching that you think really worked and that you might even keep when you go back to your normal teaching style?
Welcome, everybody. One of my favorite songs, Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles. And I hope it's both literal and figurative and literally for Here Comes the Sun. So I hope this gets everyone ready for our session today. Imagine you are an undergraduate and you're in your marketing principles class. Some of you may be marketing majors and you've been waiting for this class. Others of you may be not very thrilled to be in the class. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you and imagine that you are a 350 student. And I'd like to welcome everybody to today. And what we're going to see is I'd like to introduce you. You and your teammates have been promoted to marketing managers and consultants. And for this project, you and your team will be providing marketing advice and consulting to a restaurant called Zambo's Beans and Rice. Here's what their website looks like. They're international cooking in the neighborhood, 16th Street Heights neighborhood, Washington, D.C. And so here is our logo for the restaurant. And if you'd like to learn more about them, here is a little bit of history. It was founded by Augusto Morales. He came to this country fleeing the Guatemalan War, and he started out as a dishwasher, but he worked his way up, and he has been having this very successful business. Here's what the menu looks like. And it started out with Latin American beans and rice dishes, Guatemalan style refried black beans. But over the years, anything with beans and rice has been added to his menu. So we have Mexican, Malaysian. Dinner time, we have Middle Eastern and African. And so it revolves around the beans and rice, and it's located in an ethnically diverse neighborhood. And you'll have your client overview where you can dig much deeper. You can see we offer Coca-Cola products, beer, and wine. So in terms of the client overview, you and your team will read through this information here, and you'll see we give you some of the financials. It is a viable business, but obviously with the pandemic, there are a lot of challenges for you. So now I'm going to come out of character and stop sharing the screen. And this is something that we launched in our all of our sections of our marketing principles class. And because of the pandemic, what we wanted to do was come up with an engaging semester-long project. Now, unlike some projects where there's a big deliverable at the very end and then you have to grade it and it's stressful for the students, we work this such that every week, whatever the topic is in the class, we have an assignment associated with it. So early on, when we're defining the business and looking at our target markets, then they would make recommendations. When we get further along in the class for new product design or pricing, in other words, everything we do links in. So they get weekly assignments, weekly feedback, and then they take ownership because it builds on what they've done. And we try to make this a very personable, realistic. So we have an immigrant coming in, and I may not have said, the granddaughter, Isabella, is taking over the business now, and she's a recent graduate from University of Maryland. So the students find this very engaging. That was one of our goals, was to make this. And we have always, I can't say always, but very recently, we have always had in-class activities, but they were disjointed, and what we wanted to do was make this more sequential. And another aspect we did near the end of the semester was for the topic of sales management, we had some representatives from Pepsi participate in recording a role play. And so one took on the persona of Isabella and explained, well, my grandfather, he's not so sure about this. And then they had the Pepsi rep. And so this was recorded. And then every section we had 6 instructors across 11 sections and 2 campuses, over 700 students. But so this was an immersive learning experience, and it didn't matter which faculty they had, they all got to participate in this. So during the class, we'd show the video and stop it, talk about it, show some more. And so bottom line for this is we tried to make this a very engaging experience, even though they were on the online. And the thing about this design also is that it really is irrelevant if it's all online or if it's in class, it works. So this was something, and this is a collaborative effort. It wasn't just me. I want to give a big shout out to Mary Beth First, who had the spark for many of these things, also worked with Hank Boyd. And then we have Adil Yavaroglu, Wendy Barnes, we have Maddie Bonavia, and I think that's everybody. Should be 6 of us. So that was my first topic, is to share what we're doing in the 350 class. And I think it's not specific. It could work for undergraduates, graduates. I think this framework could work for any topic, finance, accounting. Then just quickly, I don't know how much time, I don't want to take too much time up, Darren, but I started this with music. And the story behind this is that when we were face-to-face, I had some guest speakers, some former graduates, students of mine, and I got to the class and they were already there. They were all set up and they were playing upbeat music that really appealed to the Gen Z, our students. And I talked to them after. They said, oh yeah, we just went to this big sales conference and it was all about music. And my father's a retired music professor. You see music. I just always been with music. So I said, this is a good idea. So I never was able to fully implement it in the face-to-face because I had to get there early enough to get it set up, but it's just hard enough to get it set up in the classroom. So when we went to all online, if anything, it's a little bit easier because I can just do it. So I think I'm frozen here.
We can still hear you.
Okay, I look like I'm frozen, but as long as you can hear me, which is another thing. But anyway, I think the music really helps because it's that awkward time when students are first logging on. And I play music, and you start to see the students swaying back and forth. They'll ask, what is that song? They will it just tends to get the tone of the class, and I think it helps to relax them, and then it makes them more engaged and ready to participate.
I think that's wonderful, Roxanne. And I love that it's something that's also important to you, right? I think sometimes we're a little bit afraid to have our personality be at the front when we're teaching in the classroom. But I think it's very valuable. But I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about the decision you made to have the project be holistic. So across the whole semester rather than a big deliverable at the end.
Right. So the students are of course, very stressed. And then in terms of needing to, give them frequent feedback and take away the big stress, I think it was more manageable for the students. And so far, I've talked about it from the student perspective. But for the faculty perspective, I think my fellow core course coordinators can appreciate. We want to give some structure, but it gives everyone their flexibility. So it worked. I think it worked very well. We collaborated. People could do their own grading rubrics and how they wanted to do it. So I think it gave benefit to both students and the faculty teaching it in that manner.
That's right.
And I guess the final thing I can say is we can update this, we can add to it. So we're using it again this spring, and we've received positive feedback just in terms we took some outcome measures, learning measures, et cetera. So I think it's a work in progress, but it was just a collaborative effort and everybody helped participate. And so those of you that teach the undergraduate program, you'll know that everybody who's had a marketing class has had this unifying experience. So hopefully they'll be doing a good job when you have them in your classes.
Thank you so much, Roxanne. And we'll make sure that we put on the list when we send out the resources, everybody's name, like you highlighted, because it was a collaborative project.
Exactly. And I hope I didn't forget anyone. I'll double check my list. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Nicole, if it's all right, I'm going to to call on you next, and then we'll spotlight you to chat a little bit about what was your pandemic teaching success, and what, if anything, you might bring from that to your future teaching.
Sure. You guys can hear me okay? Yes. Okay. I wanted just to chime in on what Roxanne was talking about. So I'm no longer the coordinator for 364, the management class, but I did something very similar actually to Roxanne's, what you're doing. So it's kind of cool. And Roxanne and I often find when we're in these sessions together have been doing similar things. And so we need to work together more. One thing I wanted to add to the piece about breaking up a project into smaller pieces and having small deliverables where they can get feedback is that I think it also serves to help prevent academic dishonesty, because I have this big case analysis that they do where I pick something that's kind of real world, I have them apply and analyze management concepts. And I was worried that given all of the circumstances that there would be a lot more pressure to cheat, to plagiarize or that kind of thing. And so I broke it down into small assignments throughout the semester so that they would get feedback, they would learn kind of a writing process. And it's still something that I'm tweaking and working on. It's certainly not perfect, but I think it has helped alleviate some of the pressure, because by the time they get to the end of the assignment, they've actually already done a lot of the work. So it's not this overwhelming thing that you then get this pressure to cheat or to seek help, seek assistance that's inappropriate. I was just going to chime in on that. I don't know, Darren, if you want me to give my other kind of like key takeaway that I was going to share.
I definitely do. And I would love if you could chat a little bit more about feedback, because I think it's one of those great instructional practices in the classroom, online, everywhere, right? The more feedback students get, the more, like Roxanne had said, there's a little bit of ownership, right? Because you have a sense of how you're doing and you have a sense of how you're improving, which is so
yeah. So I've been extremely fortunate and this actually ties into what my kind of big takeaway that I've learned for myself. I've been extremely fortunate that I have like rock star TAs, and I sort of tend to solicit TAs from my own classes, and then they've been through the classes with me. And so they end up doing a lot of the grading. And I will say, like, sometimes I struggle because I feel guilty about that, but I try to make it really clear both to the TAs and to the students. I mean, the students almost should be able to grade themselves. And I'm incorporating some of that into our work, is doing more self-assessment, because, the feedback I give them is great, but ultimately I would love it if they start to learn to assess themselves. And so this term, I actually had my undergrads set goals at the beginning of the semester and then talk about how they're going to grade themselves. It ties in with the content of what I'm doing, because we teach about goal setting we teach about motivation and goal setting. And for anyone that is from my department or knows my department, right, Edwin Locke, his research on goal setting theory. And so that's something that we teach. And so I actually incorporate them to do it themselves. So part of it is teaching the students to give their own feedback. Part of it is creating some tools for yourself where you can give feedback that that doesn't seem canned, but that you see the same mistakes all the time. And so we actually created a spreadsheet where you can plug and play, you sort of enter in different numbers and it spits out different comments, because a lot of the work that we're grading is qualitative. So it makes the grading process easier. But I think also really leaning on the rubrics in the speed grader. I'm not always a huge fan of rubrics, but I think that it does help kind of set some standards as to what the work should look like. I think it feeds into my key takeaway. I wrote down what's my key takeaway, and the biggest one is really to do less. I think that is the thing that I have always struggled with, because I think the work sometimes of teaching can expand to the amount of time that you give it. And all of us are doing other things, right? Some of you are doing incredible research. You can't let teaching take up all of your time. Some of you are like me and you're dealing with small children running around your house and you're trying to homeschool them and teach them to read, right? So we have to sort of figure out ways to do less. And so there's a couple of very practical things that I've done. And actually one piece of research that I'll share The National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity has, and it's actually a resource that everybody has access to. If you are at Maryland, you have access to it. It's not just for women, it's not just for underrepresented groups, it's for everyone. They have a course planning workshop where a woman actually sits with you and you basically sit and you plan your courses for the semester. And she forces you to do it in less time than you would normally. And part of this is just learning that you can actually have just as big of an impact in less time with your teaching. And so I have found that as I spend less time, my evals are better. My teaching is actually better. It seems counterintuitive, but it's really true. And what she said is that it's funny that the research that's been done on, particularly with women and people from underrepresented groups, is that the more time you spend on your teaching, actually the worse your outcomes are. The worse the outcomes are for students, and the worse the outcomes are for you on your course evals. And yet we have this imposter syndrome, right? A lot of women, I speak for that group because I'm part of that group, right? But a lot of women, the woman that runs the seminar, she's a Black woman, and she says a lot of faculty from underrepresented groups have this like imposter syndrome that so they feel like, oh, I have to prep, I have to do more, I have to keep going. And actually it ends up hurting you rather than helping you. So I have been very intentional in trying to do less. Part of that is because I've had to, given the circumstances, but I think it is an important lesson that I've really learned that spending less time is to have activities that are more impactful. And I think the thing that I've learned that all of you can do too is to trust yourself. Like, you are an expert. You are all amazing. I know that working with a full-time MBA program, the faculty that I've seen, I'm just blown away by how smart and dedicated and creative people are. And so I think you just have to learn to trust yourself and know that, just an hour of course prep time, you can get a lot done in that amount of time. You know more than you think you do. So I think that's been my real key takeaway for that.
I think that's wonderful, and I'm so glad that you were able to speak to that, Nicole, because I think that, especially with the pandemic, I think we were dealing with so much more, and yet somehow the standards got higher at the same time, and that was sort of a deadly combination for a lot of people and their confidence. And I think it's amazing because I hear a lot of faculty talk about how they want their class to be as engaging as possible, and it's an amazing goal, but then they don't grade any of that work, or they don't use those as in-class assignments that can be worth something for their students and themselves to sort of create that feedback cycle and build in interaction as part of the graded model, because your learning objectives are written, but one of your teaching objectives was you want your students to engage with the content. And so I think rewarding yourself as a faculty member, and especially rewarding your students for the fact that they are participating and they are engaging with you in the classroom, in the online classroom, the Zoom room, whatever it might be, is deeply, deeply important. So
one thing I'll say too is that there's the OTL has a bunch of templates that my students really have liked. The assignment handout template has been golden, and it also has helped me, I think, with grading. It makes grading a lot easier on the back end. So sometimes, and I know I said less is more, but I've spent more time creating an assignment, but then less time answering questions and less time grading, because everything is so clear to the students that it makes it a sap to just sit down and actually do the work of grading. Because sometimes it's just getting over that hump of sitting down and doing it that's hard for a lot of us, because it sucks. It's the worst part of the job. But I think it changes the model where you're giving, the expectations are so clear that you really feel more justified in giving even developmental feedback, even critical developmental feedback. So, and then the other thing too is don't get too hung up on your lighting, your audio, and everything having to be perfect. I feel I sometimes compare myself to my colleagues, and we're all dealing with different circumstances. I just realized I have dog poop bags back here, and it's just, this is not, we're doing the best we can here. So I think giving yourself some grace is really important too.
Absolutely. But with that nod to backgrounds, I'm going to call on the person who has one of my all-time favorite backgrounds, which is you, Lee. So just for my benefit, if you want to talk about the amazing thing that is behind you as a Marvel fan, but then of course go into the practice that you found related to success for you in the classroom, and that you might bring forward to your future teaching?
Thank you very much, and hello everybody. I'm happy to be here. Well, this background is my wife. Every birthday, anniversary, I'm a big fan of Marvel Comics and Stan Lee, and also football. So I have a bunch of autographed things in the background here. The Iron Man poster is actually signed by Stan Lee, and then I have a picture of Stan Lee and Spider-Man signed. And then I have one of my favorite all-time football players was Peyton Manning. So she got me a Peyton Manning signed thing. It's just a thing, and she helped me put this wall together. And I think it's fine. I think Nicole had a very good point. Is that I think it's important the students just see us as people. And here we are. This is me in my house, and here's where I live. In fact, I'll tell you one interesting little story that. One morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, my little dog started barking, and my student says, "Oh, who's that?" I said, "Oh, that's my little dog." And they said, "Oh, can we see her?" I said, "Yeah." So I got my dog and brought her out and shared her. And then later in the semester, they asked to see her again. So I think just being real, is important. But there were two things that I did semester and this semester that had been very successful. And both of them are related to engagement and collaboration. And I have to give a lot of credit, in fact, almost all the credit here to Leslie Lindsay, because last semester, Leslie was able to coordinate with PepsiCo and to help me and Grace and I were teaching 372, logistics and supply chain management together. We brought PepsiCo into the classroom for a live case, and it was a real live case. I mean, it was something they had just come out with. It was an initiative they had dealing with direct-to-consumer snacks and pantry items, and it was very innovative. They had just started it a couple of months before, and so what PepsiCo did is we arranged for them, first of all, to sort of describe the program. And they came into the classroom one time, a group of them, like 3 or 4 of them came into the classroom. And we had almost an entire class period talking about this initiative and what they were doing and what they were trying to accomplish and how it related to their goals and what concerns were. And so we turned it over to the students and said, so then how might they, what are the strengths and weaknesses of this program? How might they improve the program? What recommendations do you have for them? 2 weeks later, they came back for a Q&A. So students had a chance to work together in their groups. This is a group project. So they had a chance to work together in their groups, and they had some questions. Well, what about this and what about that? And then I met with several of the groups where we were saying, well, would this work or would that work? I sort of let them take the lead, and I would provide whatever guidance I could. And then toward the end of the semester, PepsiCo came back and the teams presented their recommendations, what they thought worked, what they liked, what they didn't like. And actually, I let PepsiCo help grade the projects. And the students were aware of that up front. I gave them a rubric. Part of that was PepsiCo and part of that was us. And it was hugely successful. And I have to tell you that one of the reasons I think it might have been more successful than otherwise is that in several of these in-class meetings, several of my former students who are now full-time employees of PepsiCo came into the room representing PepsiCo. And my current students could see that there was life after school. There's life after the university. And my former students were sharing, what it was like and kinds of things they learned in this course that were relevant to what they're doing. So that live case was very successful. I would love it again, but ironically, and I think this is kind of interesting, ironically, it would be harder to do in a classroom setting, because in a Zoom setting, it's easy enough to get people from companies to Zoom into a meeting. But if you're asking them to drive to College Park and commit to a half a day or something to do the presentation, that this is actually one thing that I think worked better on Zoom than a live classroom setting. So that was the one thing. And then the second thing I did is I was looking to try to get my students from some hands-on experience with real software, supply chain software. So I was able to identify and negotiate with a software company a trial period, a 30-day free trial period for some very current software that's being used in the supply chain industry. And the company representatives came in to the classroom via Zoom and explained the software and talked about what it did and why it was becoming the industry standard. And then I chose a case that the company had developed. And what the students were asked to do in a group was to work as a team to come up with a solution to the case. It was a supply chain optimization problem. And then at the end, I had the company, Lamasoft, come in again to hear the students' presentations so they could get a sense of what the students did with the software and how well they did in terms of applying the software. And I think the thing I'm really grateful about on this is that it really gave students some hand-on experience with software that they're likely to be using when they go out and get their supply chain jobs. And then I think just the sort of the cherry on the top of the cupcake was that Lamasoft allowed my students, if they wanted, for free, to continue on to work toward a certification. They could do that on their own. And this was a $2,500 deal. I mean, if you were to pay for this, it would cost you $2,500. And I know a couple of my students have started this, but I don't know if they've pursued it because it's fairly rigorous. It's fairly rigorous to get the certificate, but I certainly encourage them in that direction. And that program was so successful last semester in my supply chain strategy course that I'm using the same program this semester in my risk course with a different case. And then I'm actually working with Martin. I've gotten Martin to agree to purchase the software for the university because one of the problems I had was we only had 30 days and 30 days was fairly compressed. And so now for next year, I think we're going to have this software and we'll be able to apply it to a lot of our supply chain courses. I think it applies to a lot of those courses. So for me, it was the engagement, collaboration, doing something that was real, doing something that was tangible, because I just found the students it was hard to keep their attention, very hard to keep their attention. And Zoom fatigue is a real thing. I mean, not only for students, but for me too. I mean, I can feel it at the end of the day after my third class. I mean, oh, this is, I'm done with this. But those were a couple of things that worked really well for me, and I would hope to carry them over. But as I said, the live case is probably more difficult to do in a real classroom setting. Although I am more than ready to get back to the classroom. I mean, that's really where I want to be. But these are things that work well for me in my courses last semester and then this semester.
So thank you so much for sharing, Lee. I think you do such a beautiful job of being at the intersection of, project-based learning and experiential learning, right? Where you don't just think of, I'm going to bring this project to life, right? You think of that, like you said, there's life after school piece where they get to see business people are using the same skill that they are there being taught by you in that moment, which is so valuable. I do want to say we do have our experiential learning team. Just so that people know that if they want to bring a live case to life, you certainly can do that. You can sort of design a case with them, and they do that for in the classroom as well as online. But I agree with you. I think sometimes online just means there's maybe a one level higher up of executive who's able to be there, who's able to speak, who's able to participate, which I think is really, really valuable. And actually, Protiti, I think you have done an in-person live case. Is that right? For quite a long time. So again, just in case anybody has any questions about that, bringing that in-class, in-person piece to life, we can give you a list of loads of faculty who have sort of done that before, and you can engage with them and ask them about it. But thank you so much, Lee. I'm really glad that you were sort of able to share all that, because I know that you invested quite a lot in making sure that your online was a success. And I do want to second what you're saying. We talk a lot about Zoom fatigue and compassion around what the students need, and the same goes for the faculty, right? It could be very tiring, especially if you're having to teach multiple sections, and so you feel like you're sort of reiterating. And I think also you mentioned something really interesting, which was a lot of these things transfer. not just to the in-person, but to other classes, right? A practice that you try, that you see how it works, it did boost engagement. Now you can use it, like you said, in your risk class. And so with that, I'm actually going to call on Mike, if you're ready.
Yep.
He has come up with the ultimate sort of way to make your online teaching continue to be valuable across all the things you're doing with asynchronous learning. So.
Okay, great. Thanks for asking me to present what we've been doing. So I'm going to talk about asynchronous work. There are three aims I have in mind in creating the asynchronous content. First is to introduce the student to a new concept and to give basic examples of solutions using that content. The second is that the students have some activity to help them absorb the material. And then the third is that the asynchronous content will connect to an upcoming follow-up synchronous class, whether it be in Zoom or in person. And I'm going to use two courses as examples. The first is the Introduction to Business Finance course, BMGT 340, which is the core course for undergraduates that every business student has to take. Now, this course has already been in a blended format since 2012 or 2013 for all the students taking it in College Park. And it was begun with Sue White and Karen Hallows. And as I'm going to acknowledge other people as I'm talking, you're going to see that this is not something that was just created by one person. In fact, they were the leads. They started all of this. So they created the very first iteration of the videos. We've gone through several more iterations, and then we did a really big revision over this summer. With the expert help of OTL. And so we got a lot of advice from especially Carrie, Deeren, and Teresa. And I really have to give a special acknowledgement to Teresa, who is our video editor, not only in the technical side, but to really give advice about how we should design these, the new versions of the videos. And so it's important to remember when I talk about BMGT 340 first, that it's students who, a lot of students are not interested in finance. They're only taking it because they have to, and a lot are very averse to math. And as you might realize, finance requires a lot of math. Then I also want to show how I try to accomplish those aims in an advanced course, so a finance elective, banking and financial institutions. So that would be almost all finance majors. Now that course, what had been traditional up through the pandemic, up until the pandemic, and so there were no videos in existence at all before then. And so the experience of making that asynchronous work might correspond more with what it's like for most of you, where you didn't have videos ahead of time and now all of a sudden you have to come up with asynchronous material. So first, let me talk about the examples with 340. And I think it might help. Let me just share my screen. So I did screenshots of important things. All right, so everyone can see Word document there. So in 340, what we did over the summer was re-record what I call the descriptive portions of the videos. So we would make one video for an entire chapter. And so there would be about 50, or sometimes it would be half a chapter. So there'd be 15 total videos that could be between maybe 20 up to 50 minutes long, each one divided up into clips. The descriptive clips, which there are some screenshots here, could either be text like bullet points, some graphics. It could also be a mixture of video of one of us speaking. So there is that experience of, my professor is speaking to me right now, just as if we were, in a live session. We recorded the video and audio first after making a script. And the script actually really helped. As much as I didn't want to make a script, I like to be able to just talk a bit more off the top of my head, because as we've been discussing, we are experts in our material. And it really helped, though, for the video to have it typed out. It was worth the time. And I think it also made the editing much easier for Teresa, the fact that we had everything written out and we could tell her, okay, here's the script. And, these are the places where we think you might turn into bullet points. This would be a good place for a graphic. This would be the kind of graphic that would be good there. If she needed something that we needed to provide, like equations, then we would just give them to her, and then she would place them where would be appropriate. The descriptive videos might be 5 to 10 minutes long. We've uploaded them in Panopto. Now, Panopto gives lots of enhancements that we used. One was because we wanted to put all of the clips into one video by chapter, we can organize it using something called contents in Panopto, where we could just put titles at different points. So a student could watch the whole video all the way through, and then if they needed to go back to a particular section, they don't have like 30 minutes to try to figure out what was that section. They're basically, you could think of them as chapters within the video that can help them navigate. There are also the option of putting in quizzes, and we use them as self-checks. So they're not graded. It's just for the viewer to be able to see, did I get what I was supposed to get? So for example, the first self-check here on this lecture, this recording on bonds, gives you one question. You can put in a second. They had 2 questions. I intentionally answered one wrong just to show this is what it would look like. And then they can just do it as much as they want. Or they can just skip it if they want to. Now, the other kinds of clips after a descriptive video would be more like a whiteboard. This is a example problem, and this is our solution. And so we would explain how to do the problem and then write on a Wacom tablet. So looks like this with a stylus, and it makes it much easier to write than like trying to use a mouse, which is basically impossible. So it would look like the way it would look as if they're in a class on a whiteboard. To save time, though, the problem was already pre-printed, and then I would just have space and I would write it out. I happen to use a program called Snagit, which is really easy for me to edit. So we did the editing for the how-to videos, where we could just take out times we stumble or we felt, we need to calculate a number on the calculator. And we thought, well, we don't need to make people wait for us to do that. They could pause it if they want to try to do it themselves. So we tried to get the time down to each one of these individual problems to 2 to 2.5 minutes. But it could easily take 10 minutes to record. But then it really was amazing. I would have in my mind, okay, I'm going to get this down to 2 minutes. And I would just start becoming ruthless, where I thought, okay, there's a little pause, there's a little, and I could take a few seconds here and there. And it was really amazing that you can actually cut down something that took you 10 minutes to explain into 2 minutes. And it really packs a powerful punch. If students need more time to absorb it, they're able to pause it and rewind. So let them control that. You don't need to give them the pauses, basically. And so there's this mixture of the descriptive how-to videos. Now, we give credit for watching the videos by giving a Canvas quiz. So if you've set up a Canvas quiz before, it's just the quizzes section. We make the settings. We give them 2 attempts by a deadline. The deadline is before we talk about it in class. And it's designed to be just like the questions or the problems that we demonstrated, or very easy answers could be obtained from the descriptive part. And just, I want to show that you also have the ability to embed the video within the quiz. So I recommend that they go to Panopto, watch the full video, take advantage of all those enhancements, and then take the quiz. But the reality is a lot of people just want to jump into the quiz. We want them to be more likely to watch the video, so we embed the video into the quiz. The master video is at the top always of every question, but then within each question, we embed just the clip that is associated with that question. So there's one question per clip, and they get 10% of their grade from doing the video quizzes. Now, I just want to connect. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Then what I would do in class is to start out with a very quick review of what was in the asynchronous material. So for example, on bonds, I would just go over some really major thing that I want them all to just have down at that moment for what we're going to do next. So it would be something like, here's how to price a bond. I'm going to go explain it from beginning to end, but I'm just going to do it in like 3 minutes. And then if it's something that I felt, okay, well, they've been doing work already, instead of me doing another example, just say, okay, well, you do it now. You did the video quiz. You supposedly know how to do this. You do it. We use a clicker program. We happen to use a clicker program called Learning Catalytics. They enter their answer. We can see the distribution. We can give feedback. And then I can demonstrate, okay, this is the solution. If 100% are getting it right, then I'll go through more quickly. And then after establishing that everyone is caught up with what they should have gotten from the asynchronous material, they can ask their questions, get some clarifications. Then during the live session, whether it be Zoom or in person, then we advance it. We go to more challenging questions, more application. So the stuff they're doing asynchronously are just the building blocks. And they don't necessarily have to do it on a clicker program. I'll just demonstrate because that might be too much pressure to do a really hard problem and you're going to get graded on it. The points they get for the clicker stuff is just 2.5% of the entire course grade. All right, now I'll take less time on banking because I know my time is running out. With the advanced course, I'm assuming that students have more intrinsic motivation. They are finance majors. And also this is the one where I didn't have all that history to build on. I had to do it all starting a year ago, basically about a year ago from now, and just make these videos. And so I would basically just make a worksheet, fill in the blank style, and record myself just what I would give in class, like on an overhead. And it would be the very basic thing. And I would make available to them that same blank Word document where, it would be some words in it and be an outline, and then they would fill in along with me. They can copy what I write. Of course, I hope that they're putting in some of their own notes too. There might be also sections where I say, I think that you can do this on your own. For example, this is drawing on bonds from 340. I'll do one, but then you need to do the rest, and I want you to draw a conclusion from it. So they do that, maybe be a 30 to 50-minute video. When they come to synchronous class, we will begin by going over those things. Like if there's something I wanted them to do, we'll talk about, okay, what was your answers? Let's make sure we're all understanding that part. And then the class is going to be more focused on discussion and basically breaking the ball further down the field where you're doing more advanced problems. And it's just here's more examples. There might be, if there's something more advanced to explain that I think would be too much in the video where, if they might need to ask me, then I might save that. But the synchronous class would be much more just, here, let's just do problems. Let's do harder problems. Let's give you an idea about what you will have to do eventually, like when you take a test or do your homework. Yeah, so that's it. We wanted to introduce a concept, give them an activity, and then connect it to what we do live.
Yeah. So, Michael, I love that you really consider sort of where your students are at when you make those decisions. And Nicole had popped a question in the chat that was similar to this. And you had highlighted you really want to make sure that those pieces are the things that are foundational, or that you might have to repeat a few times, or really something that the students have to get before they move forward. And I love that you reward that, right? It's 10% of their grade. They have 2 attempts so that they can really try to master that content. And I am mindful of time. So Jim and John, I promise I'm gonna get to you. We might be just a tiny bit shorter. But Mike, I know you have one excellent story about the fact that you did not teach at the master's level. That those students knew who you were. So if you could just tell that story.
Oh, so when we did our videos with Karen and Sue, and Alinda also did some of the videos, we made the library videos available to all of the faculty if they needed to give background to master's students who could vary in their previous exposure to finance. And so I went to a master's lunch, even though I wasn't teaching any master's classes at the time. I like free lunches. And so I was going to the master's of finance lunch, and I was introducing myself to the students. And then they said, oh, actually, I already do know you because I've watched the videos. So I felt, oh, okay, I guess I don't have to feel so guilty that I'm coming to this lunch.
Yeah, I just love that, because it's like Marnie just shouted out, it's you have a bigger impact. So, like Michael aptly described, there is work to it. The educational technology team at OTL is really excellent in helping bring those visions to life, but it's something that replicates over a long period of time. So, something even to consider, maybe some summer projects, or if you're thinking about asynchronous development, to give yourself a little bit of time, but know that it'll have a cascading benefit. So thank you very much, Mike. So Jim, I notice that the chat has gone very, very technical and very tools based. And so I can think of no better time to introduce you and have you talk about sort of how you leaned in to tech when we made this shift.
Okay. Okay. So, hey, how are you? How's everyone? So I'm just going to quickly run through, given that there's so little time left, some of the things I do in my classes. So let me just go ahead and share my screen. So this is what my desktop, I think you should be able to see my desktop. And let me turn on the spotlight. So this is what my my desktop looks like. I have a special mic that is noise isolating. So in theory, if there's information going on in other parts of the room, you don't hear it as much. So I have a high definition webcam, for good or bad. I have usually a Surface Pro sitting here that I can write things out with my stylus, as the Wacom tablet is used for. And I have a couple of screens, so I have multiple, just like I have now, multiple windows up. And sometimes I'll even have a third screen, although usually I just have two screens up. So this is what my typical workspace is like. It's also important, I noticed, I have a wired computer, so it's wired straight to the internet, as opposed to using over the air, over Wi-Fi. And that's really important too, because if you do over Wi-Fi, you're going to notice a degradation and more freezing and worse audio. So having it wired into the Ethernet port works, is very helpful. So what typically happens in a typical class like mine is if I can do a new share, is I'll start out with a quick outline. I'll quickly walk through what I'm going to try and accomplish in that class. I'll talk about various assignment due dates. I'll have that. Every class and this is one thing that I've done with the pandemic that I didn't have before, every class has a participation exercise that they submit, which is graded for just completion, it's not really graded for accuracy, just the fact that they attempted it. So that helps keep them engaged. I try to have every class, I have some slides. I usually have, every class has some interaction and some exercise they do. And I try to break everything up in about 15-minute chunks. So there's never more than 15, at most 20 minutes of lecture. There's the idea is to keep them engaged. The one thing that's really nice with Zoom is to have the automatic breakout groups, which is harder to, in person, also you would have to manually get people to separate and form groups and do things. Now it's very quick. You can just set the groups, although it's much easier to just have them automatically assigned. And you can do things like I just did this last class, I did this worksheet here, for example, in this last class I did. So in this class, what I did is I had a worksheet that students had to work on. I presented some material, they interacted with the worksheet. We went back to some lecture, the interaction worksheet, and they kept going in breakout rooms to do this. And one of the things that I did, and truthfully, I didn't know that you could do this, is I just made co-hosts, at least one person in every breakout room, so that they could share their own worksheet, so they could work together in that breakout room on their worksheets. So this is one of the things. So every class has some sort of worksheet that they're working on, whether calculations or different exercises, interacting with the material. I also have a whole series of assignments. I use a lot of software in my classes, And so, for example, what I will typically do is I will create a lot of videos that they can watch asynchronously outside of the classroom so that they can learn how to interact with the software, and I don't really have to take up too much class time with it, so they can watch the video. I usually break it in chunks, like for this group assignment. So they would go through. They would go through each of these steps. They could do a step, pause it, do the step with the real software, pause it, and go back. And I use Camtasia software for that. Camtasia is great because you can do a lot of highlighting. You can show where when you click on something, the clicks are highlighted, and you can control the audio sound. By the way, if you do Camtasia, it's important to switch your, at least in my case, switch the audio from stereo to mono, so that when you do that, it gets a better audio experience for the students. So I'll have this software, and that way they can do various team assignments. And those are just some of the things I do in class. Of course, the one thing that we can do much better now with Zoom is we can share our desktops a lot easier. The software, a lot of students who would sit in the back of the room often would be less engaged in the classroom. And of course, there's a question whether or not they're paying attention to the screen, but now they can at least read the material, see it up close, and you can highlight with the spotlight feature, highlight things that was a little bit harder to do in person. So anyway, those are just a few things that I've done in the classroom.
Yeah, thanks a million, Jim. I think one of my favorite things was that you still leaned in to group work, right? You still had them in breakout rooms. For those of you thinking, looking at Jim's sort of elaborate worksheet, which is so crucial for the topic that he teaches, Google Docs and Google Sheets work similarly. If you have a sort of simple, if it's a language prompt and they have to do a bit of writing, it's the same idea, so that you're sending them into the breakout room with the deliverable, that they're working collaboratively on something that when they come back, they can share, or when they're in that room, they can share with each other as well, which I think is really instructive. And like you said, sometimes a little bit faster because getting them to move around and the shifting of chairs and things, especially if you do randomize, if it's something like an assignment where it doesn't matter that they're in working groups, you can randomize and have them collaborate with different people at different levels. So
and it's easy to join those breakout groups too, and just jump from room to room to room.
Yes, and that's also very instructive practice. So even if you can't visit them all, if you visit a few, you'll have seen them and you can call on the other groups to share. And so it's just a way to visit with them and see how they're doing, and set up some norms. And then one last thing, John, get ready. I'm going to pass it over to you in a minute. Is that Jim? I noticed from your agenda and the way that you set up your class, nothing is implied. Everything is explained. Right. This is our whole agenda. These are where you can make up extra credit. This is where the videos live. And I think that that's a really just important practice, and it in person as well. Right. It's not taking things as implied, but making sure your students know. I think like Nicole had referenced and Roxanne had referenced earlier, know what's expected of them and how to do those things.
And the nice thing about some of the things I can, especially on the due dates, I often will just take that whole thing, copy and paste it right into the chat, so students have access right away, which is something, again, you can do with Zoom that you couldn't do in person.
Yes, absolutely. All right, John, so you leaned into tech, but in a slightly different way. And you leaned into one of the most old school nemesis of some of the faculty. So I'm happy to hear you talk some good things about Canvas, and then share a little bit about what you did and how you brought that to life. We're going to keep recording until you're finished. So please don't worry if you notice sort of people dropping off or anything. Your piece will still be set and recorded.
Yikes, I didn't realize there's such a hate for Canvas. So I'll be fairly brief because I realized I think I have about 4 or so minutes. So for me, I leaned primarily most into the technology that we already have, because that's what most people are familiar with. And then I try to experiment as much as I can with new technologies, just because there's so much good out there. One thing I just want to quickly share that I did for one of my classes is ask them what do they think about what their expectations are for me. And that's a common thing that we do, but I thought, how can we infuse some technology into doing that? And there's a free tool out there, not the courses. There's a free tool out there called Mentimeter, and it allows students in real time to give responses, and then it builds a word cloud. So you can clearly see in the word cloud that I got from the students was pretty much anything that I would expect in the face-to-face class. So it was nice to know that they weren't expecting anything necessarily different from me, but that all of the good teaching practices that I would need to do anyway would carry into the online space as well. So I thought this was really engaging, and I think they appreciated it. What I told them is that I posted their word cloud as an announcement, and we're going to revisit the word cloud both at the midpoint when they're going to get a survey, and then both at the end of the course. So we're putting in multiple touch points to make sure that they at least feel that I've heard them and that I've addressed their expectations. So I thought that was a really good thing to add as well. I would say there's a really huge shout out to Zoom. I used Zoom fairly heavily. My classes were not asynchronous, they were all synchronous, just because of the material and from hearing from students is essentially what they preferred. So I also relied on chunking in the extent that I never spent more than 10 or 15 minutes in terms of lecturing at them. The way that I broke it up is not just using Zoom rooms, but I also did individual work as well. And the reason I primarily did that is students kept saying to me, I really hate these Zoom breakout rooms. I just want to do some of the stuff on my own to try it. And I want to do it while you're here so that I can get feedback if I'm not doing it correctly. So I actually started doing a combination of both individual activities and group activities. So for my TAs, I actually make them come to my lectures because they can then help me circulate around all of the individual students. In my classes, there's anywhere between 25 to 40 students. So having the TAs has been helpful to answer any other questions with me as well. In addition to that, I also use the clicker polls, which I think is helpful as well. So Turning Point integrates with Zoom. Students don't need to buy anything. They can just quickly go to a website, and it helps to, again, get their participation as well. The other thing about participation is, again, in Zoom, we didn't really talk about the reactions button, and I have to say it is super helpful for me for a couple of reasons. The two primary questions that I ask for the reactions button are you okay? So can I keep going? And I ask them to do a green check mark or a red X. And also when they're working on individual stuff, I tell them to give me a green check mark when they're done. That cues me in to know that, okay, about half of the students are good. That means about 3/4 of the students are good at this point, because not everybody's going to respond. My other favorite reaction button is the go faster and go slower, because I'm from New York, so I talk very, very quickly. So I have the students constantly tell me, please press the go faster button if I'm going too slow, or press the go slower button if I'm going too fast. And I found that being really helpful as well. The last thing I want to, so my big takeaway is, at least from the technology, experiment with the technology. You don't need to use 7 different tools. Pick one new one each semester. For me, this was Mentimeter. I hadn't used it before, and it ended up being really, really successful. So that was the technology piece. The one other piece that I want to talk about is the TA piece. One thing that I do that is really helpful, well, actually 2 things that I do are really helpful. I do really rely heavily on rubrics, just because I got a lot of questions from students of, do I need to do this? Do I need to do that? If you give them a clearly outlined rubric, it's not meant to give every single piece, but it's meant to give ranges. So for example, if you have clear questions, you're going to get about 3 points. If you have less clear questions, you're going to get about 2.25 points. This is just how it broke down mathematically. This is super helpful for grading, because when I go through grading, all I really have to do is check, 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 and then where I feel appropriate to add in some comments. So for me, grading so many students, this has definitely sped up my grading. So I thought, especially in the online space, I'm busy, and to Nicole's really good point of how can we go faster and still provide the same quality, for me, this was really helpful to do that. The second thing that I did in terms of student support is requiring my TAs to do the homework assignments that I'm expecting the students to do. So I do it myself, and then I multiply that time by 4. I let the TA do it, and I have them multiply it the time by 2. So that gives me a general idea of about how long is a student going to take to do it. And that helps me come up with quizzes and exams and basically just generally homework assignments to see, am I giving them stuff that is appropriate or is it too difficult? And I found that to be really helpful as well. So I probably talked really fast, but I know we're kind of out of time. So I will stop there.
Thank you so much, John. And I know I am sorry we're out of time. I wish that we would keep going kind of as long as we need to go. But I am going to ask Carrie if you can unspotlight, and then we'll actually put John's practice into action if we go back to gallery view. And if everybody could click on the reactions tool at the bottom of your screen and just do the clap emoji for all of the panelists, because I thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, for sharing the practices that you used. There's nothing like hearing from other people how they brought this piece to life. And this was an exceedingly challenging time and continues to be an exceedingly challenging time. So the fact that you're all willing to help each other, I think, is inspiring and instructive, and I'm very grateful for it. So thank you to all of you very much for being here. We're going to send a resource list to everybody who's in attendance. So if you feel like you missed a name or you missed a great idea, we'll also pull some of the stuff from the chat. So nobody will miss any elements. And I'm just very grateful that you were all here. We're still here if anybody has additional questions, and a special thank you to the 6 panelists. So take good care all.